The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Silver Creek, Wyoming territory, drawing Zane Jackson's attention away from the general store where he'd been purchasing supplies. It was 1876, and the small frontier town was usually quiet on weekday afternoons, which made the commotion in the town square all the more alarming. Zane dropped the sack of coffee beans he'd been examining and hurried outside, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt revolver holstered at his hip. The scene that greeted him made his blood run cold. Two women, bound to the wooden posts of the town's whipping platform, were being publicly flogged by a man Zane recognized as Sheriff Dolan, a man whose reputation for cruelty preceded him. One of the women was sobbing, her dress already torn and bloodied from the lash. The other stood defiant, her head held high despite the obvious pain. A small crowd had gathered, some watching with discomfort, others with a disturbing eagerness that made Zane's stomach turn. "This is what happens to thieves in my town," Sheriff Dolan bellowed, raising the whip again. "These women stole from the Henderson ranch, and they'll pay the price." Zane's jaw tightened. Public whipping was barbaric, especially for women, regardless of their alleged crime. Without thinking, he pushed through the crowd, his tall frame and broad shoulders making a path as onlookers stepped aside. "That's enough, Sheriff," Zane called out, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. He stepped between the sheriff and the women, facing the lawman directly. Sheriff Dolan's face reddened with anger. "This ain't your concern, Jackson. Step aside." "I'm making it my concern," Zane replied, standing his ground. "Whatever they've done, this isn't justice. It's cruelty." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "You questioning my authority? These women are thieves. The Henderson family lost valuable property." "Then let them stand trial properly," Zane insisted. "Not like this." The defiant woman behind him spoke up, her voice surprisingly steady despite her situation. "We didn't steal anything. We were collecting what's rightfully ours." Zane didn't turn around, keeping his eyes fixed on the sheriff and the deputy who had now moved to Dolan's side, hand hovering over his gun. "You're interfering with the law, Jackson," Dolan warned. "I can have you arrested for that. And I can have witnesses testify that you're administering punishment without a proper trial," Zane countered. "I don't think the territorial judge would look kindly on that." A tense silence fell over the square. Sheriff Dolan was known for his temper, but Zane Jackson wasn't a man to be trifled with either. At 32, he'd earned respect throughout the territory as a skilled rancher and a fair man, but also one who could handle himself in a fight when necessary. After what seemed like an eternity, Sheriff Dolan lowered the whip. "Fine. They'll sit in jail until Judge Parker arrives next month. But you just made yourself an enemy, Jackson." "Wouldn't be the first time," Zane replied coolly. As the sheriff ordered his deputy to take the women to the jailhouse, Zane finally turned to look at them properly. The defiant one caught his eye immediately. She was striking, with copper-colored hair and fierce green eyes that held more fire than fear despite the obvious pain she was in. The second woman was younger, possibly her sister given the similar features, though her hair was darker and her eyes showed the terror she clearly felt. "Thank you," the defiant woman said quietly as the deputy cut the ropes binding her to the post. "But you shouldn't have interfered. This will only cause you trouble." "Seems to me you've got enough trouble for both of us," Zane replied. "What's your name?" "Gabriella Foster," she answered, wincing as she moved her shoulders. "This is my sister, Eleanor." Zane nodded to the younger woman, who couldn't have been more than 20. Gabriella herself looked to be in her mid-20s. "What really happened with the Henderson property?" Gabriella's eyes flashed. "That land belonged to our father. Henderson stole it after Pa died, changed the boundary markers. We were just taking back some of our livestock that strayed onto what he claims is his property now." The deputy pushed between them. "Save your stories for the judge. You're both coming with me." Zane watched as they were led away, noting the blood seeping through the back of Gabriella's torn dress. Something about her story and the injustice of their treatment stirred something in him that he hadn't felt in a long time. He headed straight to the town's only doctor, a gruff but competent man named Dr. Miller. "Those women need medical attention," Zane insisted as he entered the small office. Dr. Miller looked up from his ledger. "I heard the commotion. Sheriff won't let me near them, says they need to feel the consequences of their actions." "That's inhumane," Zane growled. "Infection could set in." "I don't disagree with you," Dr. Miller replied, gathering some supplies. "But Dolan's got the law on his side, even if he bends it." "Not for long," Zane muttered, already forming a plan. That evening, Zane visited the small jailhouse. Sheriff Dolan was nowhere to be seen, but his deputy, a young man named Thomas Reed, was on duty. "Evening, deputy," Zane greeted him casually. "I brought some clean bandages and medicine. Thought the prisoners might need it." Deputy Reed looked uncomfortable. "Sheriff said no visitors." "Is the sheriff here?" Zane asked, already knowing the answer. "Look, I'm not breaking them out. Just bringing medical supplies. Seems like the Christian thing to do." Reed hesitated, then nodded. 10 minutes. "And only because I don't want them dying in our jail. Bad for the town's reputation." Zane found Gabriella and Eleanor in a small cell at the back of the jailhouse. Eleanor was asleep on the single cot, while Gabriella sat on the floor, her back carefully positioned away from the wall. "Mr. Jackson," she acknowledged him as he approached the bars. "Come to see the town criminals?" "Came to bring these," he replied, passing the medical supplies through the bars. "And to hear your side of the story properly." Gabriella took the bandages with a nod of thanks. "Why do you care?" "Because what I saw today wasn't justice," Zane answered honestly. "And because I've had my own run-ins with Henderson. Man's not known for his honesty." For the first time, a hint of a smile touched Gabriella's lips. "That's putting it mildly," she sighed, glancing at her sleeping sister. "Our father died 6 months ago. He had a small ranch bordering Henderson's property. Within weeks, Henderson started claiming that the boundaries had been wrong for years, that a portion of our land was actually his." "Let me guess," Zane interjected. "The portion with the creek running through it?" Gabriella nodded.
"Exactly.
Without that water access, our remaining cattle couldn't survive. We tried fighting it legally, but Henderson has friends in the territorial offices. Then our cattle started disappearing. We tracked some to Henderson's property yesterday. We were just taking back what's ours when his men caught us." Zane considered her words. The story was all too familiar in these parts, powerful ranchers squeezing out smaller operations, especially those run by women. "I believe you," he said finally. "And I'm going to help you prove it." Gabriella looked skeptical. "Why would you risk making an enemy of Henderson and the sheriff for 2 women you don't even know?" Zane met her gaze steadily. "Because it's the right thing to do." The deputy appeared behind him. "Time's up, Jackson." As Zane turned to leave, Gabriella called after him. "Thank you,
Zane."
The way she said his name stayed with him as he stepped back into the cool evening air. Over the next few days, Zane began gathering evidence. He rode out to the boundary between the Foster and Henderson properties, examining the markers that Gabriella had mentioned. Sure enough, there were signs that they had been recently moved, fresh dirt around the posts, discrepancies with the official property maps he'd obtained from the county records office. He also started asking questions around town, discovering that several people had witnessed Henderson's men moving the markers but had been too afraid to speak up. The Henderson family had been in the territory since before statehood and held considerable influence. 4 days after the public whipping incident, Zane was returning from the Foster property when he noticed smoke rising from the direction of his own ranch. He spurred his horse into a gallop, a sense of dread building as he approached, and saw flames engulfing his barn. His ranch hands were already forming a bucket line from the well, but the fire had too much of a head start. By the time they got it under control, the barn was a smoldering ruin, and 2 of his horses had perished in the blaze. His foreman, Miguel Sanchez, approached him as he surveyed the damage. "It was no accident, Mr. Jackson. Someone poured coal oil all around the foundation." Zane's expression hardened. "Henderson."
Miguel nodded grimly.
"One of the boys saw 2 riders heading toward Henderson's property right before we spotted the fire." "This changes nothing," Zane said firmly. "If anything, it tells me we're on the right track." The next morning, Zane rode into town with purpose, heading straight for the office of Lawrence Webb, the only lawyer in Silver Creek. Webb was a former Illinois attorney who had moved west for his wife's health. He wasn't particularly courageous, but he knew the law better than anyone in the territory. "You want to challenge Richard Henderson?" Webb asked incredulously after Zane explained the situation. "The man practically owns half the county." "I want justice for the Foster sisters," Zane corrected him. "And I have evidence that Henderson falsified property boundaries." Webb sighed, rubbing his balding head. "Even with evidence, it won't be easy. Judge Parker isn't due for nearly 3 weeks, and those women will be sitting in jail until then. Unless we can get them released into someone's custody," Zane suggested. Webb raised an eyebrow. "Yours, I presume? And what will Sheriff Dolan think of that?" "I don't much care what Dolan thinks," Zane replied. "But I do care about the law, and keeping those women in jail for a crime they didn't commit isn't legal." After much persuasion and the promise of a substantial fee, Webb agreed to draft the necessary papers for a custody release. Armed with the documents, Zane headed for the jailhouse, only to find Sheriff Dolan waiting for him on the street outside. "I heard you've been poking around the Henderson property," Dolan said, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "And now you're visiting that lawyer." "Just being a good citizen," Zane replied evenly. "Making sure justice is properly served." Dolan stepped closer. "Let me give you some friendly advice, Jackson. Drop this. Henderson is not a man you want as an enemy." "Seems I already have enemies," Zane said. "My barn burned down yesterday." A flicker of surprise crossed Dolan's face, quickly replaced by indifference. "Accidents happen." "This was no accident, and we both know it," Zane countered. "Now, I have legal papers here authorizing the release of the Foster sisters into my custody until their trial. You can either honor them, or explain to Judge Parker why you refused a legal custody arrangement." Dolan snatched the papers, reading them with growing anger. "This is Webb's work. Man's always been soft." "It's the law," Zane insisted. "Those women deserve proper medical care and the presumption of innocence until proven guilty." After a tense standoff, Dolan reluctantly led Zane into the jailhouse. Eleanor was looking better, but Gabriella's face was flushed with fever, her eyes glassy as she leaned against the cell wall. "What's happening?" she asked weakly as Dolan unlocked the cell. "You're being released into Mr. Jackson's custody," Dolan explained bitterly. "Until your trial." Eleanor rushed to help her sister stand. "She's been getting worse since yesterday. The wounds are infected." Zane's jaw clenched at the sight of Gabriella's condition. "I'm taking her to Dr. Miller immediately." "She's your responsibility now," Dolan called after them as Zane helped the sisters out of the jailhouse. "If they run, it's your neck on the line." Dr. Miller confirmed that Gabriella's wounds had indeed become infected. "She needs rest, clean bandages, and these powders mixed in water twice daily," he instructed, handing Zane a packet of medication. "They can stay at my ranch," Zane decided. "It's safer than their property, with Henderson's men watching it." Eleanor looked uncertain. "We don't want to impose, especially after what happened to your barn." "It's not an imposition," Zane assured her. "Besides, we need to work together to prepare your case for Judge Parker." Gabriella, slightly more lucid after Dr. Miller's treatment, studied Zane's face. "Why are you really doing this? Most men would have walked away by now." Zane considered her question. There was something about Gabriella's spirit, her determination to fight for what was rightfully hers, that resonated with him. But it was more than that, a connection he felt from the moment he'd seen her refusing to be broken by Dolan's whip. "Maybe I'm tired of watching men like Henderson take whatever they want without consequences," he said finally. "Or maybe I just can't stand seeing innocent people suffer." Gabriella held his gaze for a long moment before nodding, a silent understanding passing between them. The following days established a rhythm as Gabriella slowly recovered at Zane's ranch. Eleanor proved to be a capable helper, assisting Miguel's wife, Rosa, with household tasks while Zane continued gathering evidence against Henderson. Each evening, they would gather around the table in Zane's modest but comfortable home, reviewing their findings and planning their strategy for the trial. Gabriella's strength returned gradually, and with it came a determination that impressed even Zane. She had a sharp mind for details, remembering exactly where the original boundary markers had been placed and identifying discrepancies in Henderson's claims. One evening, as they sat on Zane's porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and crimson, Gabriella broke a comfortable silence. "My father would have liked you." Zane smiled. "What makes you say that?" "He valued honesty and courage above all else," she explained. "Said you could tell a man's character by how he treats those who can't repay him." She turned to look at him directly. "Not many would have done what you did that day in the square." "Anyone with a conscience would have," Zane demurred. Gabriella shook her head. "But they didn't. You did." She hesitated, then added softly, "I never properly thanked you." "You don't need to," Zane assured her. "Nevertheless, thank you," she insisted. "For everything." Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a recognition of feelings that had been growing quietly amid their shared purpose. Gabriella looked away first, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. The peaceful moment was shattered by the sound of approaching riders. Zane stood quickly, his hand moving to his gun as 5 men on horseback entered his property. Richard Henderson led them, his expensive clothes and well-groomed appearance a stark contrast to the rugged cowboys who accompanied him. "Jackson," Henderson called out, "I hear you're harboring criminals on your property." Zane stepped in front of Gabriella protectively. "I'm providing shelter to innocent women who are awaiting a fair trial." Henderson's laugh was devoid of humor. "Innocent? They were caught stealing my cattle." "Your cattle?" Gabriella stepped forward despite Zane's attempt to keep her behind him. "Those were foster cattle that you claimed along with land that never belonged to you." Henderson's face darkened. "Watch your tongue, woman. Your father knew better than to challenge me. Shame he didn't teach you the same lesson before he died." Zane felt rather than saw Gabriella tense beside him. "State your business, Henderson, then get off my property." "My business is simple," Henderson replied. "Drop this foolishness about boundary disputes. The Foster women sign over their remaining land to me, and I'll forget about the cattle theft." Everyone walks away happy. "Everyone except us," Gabriella retorted. "That land is all we have left of our father." Henderson's expression hardened. "Be reasonable. 2 women can't run a ranch, especially with one of you headed for prison after the trial." "They won't be alone," Zane stated firmly. "And we have evidence of your boundary tampering. Judge Parker won't look kindly on that." One of Henderson's men shifted nervously. "Boss, maybe we should quiet," Henderson snapped before turning back to Zane. "You're making a mistake, Jackson. I tried to be civil." "Civil would be respecting other people's property and not setting fire to their barns," Zane replied coolly. A flash of surprise crossed Henderson's face, quickly masked. "Accidents happen." "Funny, that's exactly what Sheriff Dolan said," Zane noted. Almost word for word. Henderson's jaw tightened. "This is your last chance. Drop this matter, or face the consequences." "We'll see you at the trial," Zane replied steadily. With a final glare, Henderson turned his horse and led his men away. Zane waited until they were out of sight before turning to Gabriella, whose face was pale but determined. "He's scared," she observed. "He wouldn't have come here otherwise." Zane nodded. which means we're on the right track. But we should be more careful now. Henderson's not above using force when threatened. That night, Zane doubled the watch around his property, his concerns justified when one of his ranch hands spotted two of Henderson's men skulking near the cattle pens. A warning shot sent them fleeing, but the message was clear. Henderson wasn't going to back down easily. As the trial date approached, tension in Silver Creek grew. Word had spread about the dispute, dividing the town between those who supported Henderson's powerful influence and those who sympathized with the Foster sisters' plight. Several witnesses who had initially agreed to testify about seeing Henderson's men move the boundary markers suddenly developed cold feet, citing concerns for their livelihoods or safety. Despite these setbacks, Zane and Gabriella continued building their case. They found an elderly surveyor who had mapped the original property lines when Gabriella's father first acquired the land, and though he was reluctant to testify against Henderson directly, he agreed to verify the official records. The night before Judge Parker was due to arrive, Zane found Gabriella standing alone on the porch, staring at the stars. The past weeks had transformed her. The physical wounds had healed, leaving only faint scars, but the experience had also hardened her resolve while softening something else within her. "Couldn't sleep?" Zane asked, joining her. She shook her head. "Too much thinking. Tomorrow changes everything, one way or another." "We have a strong case," he reassured her. "And if we lose?" she asked quietly. "Eleanor and I lose everything. You've made powerful enemies for our sake." Zane turned to face her directly. "I don't regret it. Not for a moment." Gabriella studied his face in the moonlight. "Why?" It was a simple question, but the answer was anything but. Zane had been asking himself the same thing for weeks. Why risk everything for these women? The truth had become increasingly clear to him, though he'd been hesitant to acknowledge it fully. "Because I care what happens to you," he admitted. "More than I expected to." Gabriella's expression softened. "Zane..." Whatever she was about to say was interrupted by the sound of breaking glass and Eleanor's scream from inside the house. They rushed inside to find a rock had been thrown through the window, wrapped in a piece of paper. Zane unfolded it to reveal a crude message: "Drop the case or bury the sisters." Gabriella's face paled, but her voice remained steady. "They're desperate." "Which makes them dangerous," Zane added grimly. "You and Eleanor should sleep in the back room tonight. I'll keep watch." The next morning, Judge Parker arrived in Silver Creek as scheduled. A stern but fair-minded man, Parker had earned respect throughout the territory for his unwavering commitment to justice, regardless of a person's status or wealth. The trial was held in the town hall, the largest building in Silver Creek. It seemed the entire town had turned out to witness the proceedings, with Henderson and his supporters on one side of the room, and those sympathetic to the Foster sisters on the other. Sheriff Dolan presented the prosecution's case first, claiming that the Foster sisters had been caught red-handed stealing cattle from Henderson's property. Henderson himself testified, painting a picture of two vengeful women who refused to accept that their father had sold him the disputed land before his death. When it was their turn, Zane and Lawrence Webb methodically presented the evidence they had gathered. The surveyor confirmed that the original property lines had been significantly different from the current markers. Webb produced the official county records showing that no land sale between Foster and Henderson had ever been recorded. Their strongest witness, however, was unexpected. Thomas Reed, Sheriff Dolan's deputy, stepped forward to testify that he had personally observed Henderson's men moving the boundary markers shortly after Foster's death. "Why didn't you report this?" Judge Parker asked him. Reed looked uncomfortable. "Sheriff Dolan told me to forget what I saw, said it wasn't our concern how Mr. Henderson conducted his business." A murmur ran through the crowd as Sheriff Dolan's face darkened with anger. Henderson leaned over to whisper something to his lawyer, who looked increasingly concerned. When Gabriella took the stand, she spoke with quiet dignity about her father's ranch, his sudden death, and the subsequent boundary changes. Her clear recollection of details and unwavering testimony made an impression on Judge Parker, who listened attentively. After all witnesses had been heard, Judge Parker called for a recess to consider his verdict. The tension in town was palpable as everyone awaited his decision. Zane found Gabriella sitting alone on a bench outside the town hall. "You were impressive in there," he told her, taking a seat beside her. She managed a small smile. "So were you. Whatever happens, Zane, I want you to know how much your support has meant to Eleanor and me." Zane took her hand, a gesture that felt both natural and significant. "This isn't just about support anymore, Gabriella. These past weeks, getting to know you." He paused, searching for the right words. "You're the strongest, most determined woman I've ever met. And I find myself thinking about a future where our struggles are shared, not just as allies, but as something more." Gabriella's eyes widened at his words, a mix of surprise and something warmer spreading across her features. "Zane, are you saying the town hall doors opened, and people began filing back inside for the verdict?" Zane squeezed her hand. "We'll finish this conversation after, I promise." Judge Parker's verdict was decisive. He ruled that the boundary changes had been illegally made, ordering the property lines restored to their original positions as shown in the county records. Furthermore, he fined Henderson for the false claim and ordered an investigation into Sheriff Dolan's conduct in the matter. As for the charge of cattle theft against the Foster sisters, Judge Parker concluded, "I find them not guilty, as they were merely retrieving their own property from land that rightfully belongs to them." The courtroom erupted in mixed reactions, cheers from those who supported the sisters, angry mutters from Henderson's allies. Henderson himself stormed out, his face contorted with rage, while Sheriff Dolan sat stunned, realizing that his position was now in jeopardy. Outside the town hall, Eleanor embraced her sister tearfully. "We did it. We can go home now." Gabriella nodded, her eyes seeking Zane in the crowd. When their gazes met, something unspoken passed between them, a promise, a possibility. Later that evening, as the sun set on what had been a momentous day for Silver Creek, Zane and Gabriella stood together on the land that had been rightfully returned to the Foster family. The disputed creek glittered in the fading light, the water that had caused so much conflict now flowing peacefully through the restored property. "What will you do now?" Zane asked. Gabriella looked around at her father's land, a mixture of relief and determination in her expression. "Rebuild. Make this ranch profitable again. It won't be easy, but Eleanor and I can do it." "You could," Zane agreed. "Or you could consider a partnership." Gabriella turned to him, a question in her eyes. "I meant what I said earlier," Zane continued, taking both her hands in his. "These weeks have shown me what kind of woman you are, Gabriella Foster. Brave, principled, unwavering. I find myself wanting to build something with you, not just combining our ranches, but our lives." A slow smile spread across Gabriella's face. "Are you proposing a business arrangement, Mr. Jackson, or something else entirely?" "Both," he admitted with a smile of his own. "Starting with this." He leaned forward, his lips meeting hers in a gentle kiss that quickly deepened as Gabriella responded, her arms encircling his neck as she drew him closer. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Gabriella's eyes were shining. "I think this partnership has promise," she whispered. "It has more than promise," Zane replied, tucking a strand of copper hair behind her ear. "It has a future." 3 months later, the town of Silver Creek witnessed another significant event, the wedding of Zane Jackson and Gabriella Foster. The ceremony was held on the combined Jackson-Foster ranch, with Eleanor serving as maid of honor and Miguel as best man. Even Judge Parker attended, having returned to oversee the appointment of a new sheriff after Dolan's removal from office. The new boundary markers stood firm, symbols of justice restored. Henderson had eventually sold his property and moved east, unable to face his diminished standing in the community. As Zane and Gabriella exchanged vows beneath an arch of wildflowers, both reflected on the unlikely path that had brought them together, a moment of injustice in a dusty town square that had sparked a love neither had expected to find. "I take you, Gabriella Foster, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Zane pledged, his voice carrying across the assembled guests. "To stand beside you through whatever comes, just as I stood between you and harm on the day we met." Gabriella's eyes glistened with tears as she responded, "And I take you, Zane Jackson, to be my husband. For your courage, your honesty, and your heart, which saw justice when others turned away." Their kiss sealed more than just their marriage. It affirmed the power of one person to change the course of lives by simply choosing to do what was right, even when it wasn't easy. As they began their life together, the scars on Gabriella's back faded with time, but the memory of that day in the town square remained, not as a reminder of cruelty, but as the beginning of a love story that had risen from the dust of injustice to bloom in the wild heart of the West.